work. One of my habits going back to teaching is constantly to walk around and wave my arms and jump up and down and say stuff, which I'm going to try very hard to contain here. But there's an auditorium at Cornell called the US Auditorium. That's the movie theater where campus cinema actually screens movies. There's another one, but this is for the large movies. For example, I saw Basic Instinct there. So if there's a really important work of art, that's where it's shown. Capacity of close to 500 people and a very steep incline with all the seats. So my first TA assignment, I was assigned this room. I wasn't even aware. I just look around, go to that room, enter the room, and all of a sudden it hits you. There are 500 seats looking down at the stage where you are standing. There's no board, nothing. You're just standing there. This is economics we're talking about, so I'm supposed to solve equations and draw graphs. But the best aspect of it, of course, was the fact that there were 8 people who showed up for the section. And they, of course, maximized the distance among the spanning, trying to figure out the largest spanning, the convex hull is maximized. And no microphone either, so you're trying to scream and demand supply. So, of course, the next day I made sure that my room was moved to a place that could easily accommodate 8 people without causing this much stress. But that auditorium is also where a lot of introductory classes are taught at Cornell. The one that I'm intimately familiar with is the intro econ class, micro or macro. And the problem with having a huge movie screen behind you but no blackboard, and of course even if you could bring a blackboard, it's so small relative to the size of the hull that you can't actually do anything, means trying to do everything electronically. And also, since it is the class is taught by professors of various technical abilities, means doing this without getting too technical, basically having a bunch of PowerPoint, animating graphs, doing a little handwriting on a tablet that shows up on the screen, that kind of stuff. But the bigger problem is not actually being able to show people graphs and equations or numbers. This is very simple math and simple graphs, actually. It's actually being able to get some feedback from the students that are in the room. When you have a 500-person auditorium, the most fun thing to do is when somebody else is teaching, you sit in the back in the middle of the students and realize exactly what's going on from the first 3 rows to the top of the hall. Very few people are paying attention. They're usually there just to drop off a homework or sign the attendance sheet or meet with friends. This is the time to catch up with email and all of that stuff, which would be okay. But in a 500-person class with, say, a dozen TAs, if you don't catch problems early on, all of a sudden, you have students flunking the first exam. Everything goes downhill from there. The whole course becomes trying to manage the catastrophe. You have to be able to get some kind of feedback. So way back when, I was helping with the design and implementation of this class, of the intro micro class at Cornell, and we started looking into these personal response systems that some textbook publishers were providing. Personal response systems are pieces of hardware that look like remotes. They are on a radio frequency. There's a base station associated with them. The hardware has some ID, although some of the devices we tested, the ID would be different each time. This reminds me, when you do educational stuff and look at software, hardware, there's usually a ton of WTFs there, one of which is, I think, about 90% of online quiz software that is available and is in use at very select universities actually allows people to find out the answers by inspecting the HTML source code of the page, one way, shape, or another. Now, this wouldn't be a problem. I used to assign my students these kinds of things because I would tell them, hey, the answer is in there. but you should think about these questions, and these are sort of useful cannon fodder type of questions that you can do. But, you know, some people actually use these things to grade people, and that's when the problem occurs. Also reminds me of a famous pre-registration quote-unquote hack that became public 4 or 5 years after the CS students figured it out. The online registration system enforced a certain date and time before you could get into classes. Prior to the online registration system, registration for classes used to happen in a large auditorium, actually several basketball courts deep, not even an auditorium, a sports hall, with tables for each of the classes, with students actually physically running. Physically running between these tables to register. Shift was made to an online registration system, except that the time constraints were only enforced on the client side, and the guys who wrote it thought that since this is in a Java class file, which is encrypted, compiled, nobody would be able to modify anything. Of course, the CS students figured out 10 minutes later that they can guarantee that they can get into the easier elective classes by modifying the class file itself in the appropriate manner, and thereby being able to register way before everybody else. So this is the kind of environment you operate under. One thing I have to say, again, going back to like 2 decades of how I got used to talking in front of groups and classrooms. If you have anything that pops into your mind, ask it immediately. We can sort of have a little side discussion there. This is not really a programming thing, because the actual system that I'm working on is in a state of flux after I did a bunch of demos. I'm not even using that. I put together a little demo this morning between 4 and 7 a.m. That's how easy the programming itself for the underlying thing is. You need some account management, etc. This is not really programming. It's about sort of an area where people could do probably better by using what's available out there and packaging it properly. So those are personal response systems, commonly called clickers. And here are some examples of clickers. Well, these guys are also doing iPhone software, and this is what's in use at Cornell these days. Is there a picture here? You can see faint images of these little remote-like things. And then, another TV remote. And this one has an LCD screen. This manufacturer was actually one of the earliest ones that we used. It integrated the response software with PowerPoint. The way this stuff works and the way this stuff is useful is the typical setup for a classroom like that is 2 or 3 projectors. Usually you have a main lecture projector that's showing the current slide that the lecture is on, another one that's showing the previous slide, and another one that's showing whatever current question is being polled. There are different ways the different systems interface. There's only one manufacturer, as far as I know, that actually integrates into PowerPoint, where you actually drop a little ActiveX control onto your slide, and that enables that slide to actually collect responses. Fortunately, that also has the buggiest software with regard to device IDs. There are other programs that just create this floating window over your presentation, and you can control your presentation, polling through that. The problem with the clickers is, number one, you have to get this proprietary base station. That's usually a black box. Various producers talk up the sort of open source aspect of their offering. It turns out usually that I haven't been involved in this stuff in the last 3 or 4 years, but the last state of affairs was that open source usually means you can look at it. But if you look at it, stuff happens. And sometimes if you look at it, you're like incurably hurt. I once looked at a Visual Basic USB driver interface thing that damaged my psyche for the next 3 months. The idea is useful. you have a device that can only send a limited type of inputs. That makes programming much simpler. You can get answers to basically multiple choice questions, which is, of course, the limit on what their usefulness is, because if you need specific numbers from people, or if you need free-form responses, you can't really collect those. But you can, create basically true, false, and multiple choice questions. Like in one of the classes, we wanted to survey the income distribution of the class, because everybody at Ivy League colleges pretends to be middle class. But they do. They talk about how middle class they are, but when you look at the income distribution, well, 80% of them have family incomes above 300K, and the remaining is between, say, 80K and 300K. But to be able to do that, you actually, with 5 buttons, you can't really do a survey on that, so you have to have some creativity involved in selectively asking for people's responses. Part of the problem is it's easy to obviously keep track of responses by device ID, so long as those device IDs are not constantly changing, and that was just one, pathological case. But what's more important is obviously to keep track of responses by student. And there is no functionality inherent in a 5-button clicker that allows people to enter their user IDs, student IDs, whatnot. So they have to usually go to a website and register, this website is usually controlled by the manufacturer of the personal response system. And for such a simple task of look up by device ID who owns it, the amount of information they ask the students is incredible. And it's like everybody takes this as business as usual. We're basically making the students go pay $30-40 for some piece of plastic junk that is useless except to, do this, in return for which they're giving all their demographic information to the textbook publisher and the producer of this clicker. These kinds of things bother me. It didn't bother a lot of people, and everybody these clickers are getting more widespread adoption by the day. So apparently, it doesn't really bother anybody else, but it used to bother me. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about how can you do this better. I thought about the wireless router tomato, the firmware hacks. I thought, you can use such a firmware hack to make the wireless router the local access point for the auditorium, have everybody log on with their laptops or, mobile phones, whatnot. It's not lowest common denominator enough. And I don't know how, which router you have to go pick for 500 people. Like if it only allows the last octet to be... I don't even know the network address categories, so CIDR stuff. What is it? Is it /8? 500 people. 500 people would be what?
Well, you do
/16. But is your typical home wireless router going to be able to do that, or do you have to figure out, there are all sorts of unknowns in that thing.
Yeah, 24.
Okay.
That's C, which is 256 IP total, one of which the router has.
I always have to look this stuff up. So that's one possibility. You sort of find routers that enable you to actually flash their firmware and install your web server and access point software on those, and you can do this over Wi-Fi. Problem with that is, again, people have to carry around a bunch of stuff. Plus, I don't know whether you can actually... I didn't have the knowledge, the human capital to figure that out fully and the time. But that would help with some of the problems with the PRS stuff. It's a clunky extra thing. And then some classes, if a student's taking both intro-bio and intro-econ and they pick different clicker manufacturers, for example, now you have 2 clickers. Plus, usually somebody in a fraternity brings in all his brother's clickers to class too, so they can get credit for it. So if you're sitting in the back of the classroom, you're watching some guy, shuffle 6 different clickers, punching numbers, because they get some credit for actually participating in the class. But and also, for the reasons I mentioned, it's not actually that easy to correctly track people's responses, because what happens is people take a class for 2 weeks, they sell their textbook and clicker to somebody else. The clicker is already registered on the manufacturer's website. Stuff happens. Nothing settles down for the next, until mid-semester. It's kind of a drag. People claim to have totally solved these things by having clicker apps on your iPhone, but then, of course, not everybody has an iPhone. Different people have different types of software, hardware, et cetera, et cetera. But the big problem that I have is everything proprietary, and everything is proprietary and very black box, and you don't even really know. I had to hack a bunch of Perl scripts to actually match IDs and stuff. You don't even really know if things are being correctly recorded. So I was thinking about this stuff in conjunction with long-running experiments where you have some parameters for a market, and people can go around, submit a bid here and there, and at the end of a certain period, you look at what the price and quantity is. These are good illustrative textbook market examples. And then that's when I read about somebody putting their doorbell on the internet, that stuff. That's when I found out about Twilio. This is the first time I'm trying to pronounce it, so if anybody knows the correct pronunciation, please let me know. And it dawned on me. All these kids have their cell phones anyway. They're all messaging during the class anyway. Why not poll people via SMS? I mean, the standard objection to this is, well, I don't want cell phones to be used in my classroom, but everybody knows that people are, or if you don't know, you're living in a cave someplace, that people are messaging constantly. One great advantage is people are unlikely to give their friends their cell phones to take the class. So that's a little bit of a control. Not that much of a control, obviously, because somebody could take a picture of the slide and then send it over, whatnot. So how many people have heard of Twilio here? You can, you go there, you can get numbers for $1 a month, and let's zoom in a little bit. So I was very happy when I found this number, 646I or check. But then, of course, I realized on modern cell phones, those letters don't necessarily correspond to the numbers. Right? It's not the same. My Nokia is totally messed up. But I was very happy that it's spelled IOCheck, so I got that number. It's $1 a month. This is the one I'm using for testing. You can associate a URL with voice calls, and you can associate a URL with SMS. And whenever Twilio receives an SMS message for this phone number, it invokes that URL with a certain type of message, not this one. Okay. So it basically, you can choose whether it should be get or post. Your URL, kind of like a CGI script or whatnot, gets a post request or a get request. These parameters and their values. The important things are obviously SMS SID. Account SID is a private little cookie that you can use to see if the message that your URL got really was intended for your account, because supposedly only Twilio and you know that secret and nobody else knows that secret. And the phone number from which this was sent, and the phone number to which this message was sent, plus a body. This means, within the confines of a text message, you can actually do somewhat free-form stuff, so long as you can get people to follow basic instructions and use Perl's flexibility in terms of parsing these messages. But the nice thing is, the moment you receive a message you have adequately recorded the response. For grading purposes, it doesn't matter that you may not necessarily know from whom the message came at the time. The students who want credit for their responses have sufficient incentive to go engage in whatever registration mechanism you have. But you don't have this beginning of semester huge avalanche of people, attacking, trying to maintain registration lists in sync between your gradebook software, your course content website, your manufacturer's website, etc. You just record responses by phone number, and you can even do this thing manually at the end of the semester by sending a hash of their phone number to the number from which these messages were coming, and then giving some secretary the hashes and the grades, and anybody who comes with the claim code, you can basically give them the grade. Then you don't violate privacy at all. Totally, not totally, but much more secure way of actually communicating with people and finding out who gets credit for what kind of thing. So I thought, this is very convenient. You don't really, for a multiple choice question, or for someone to write, the correct price is $5 a unit, whatnot, you don't really need a whole iPhone app or a giant big website. All you need is a Perl script that will process post requests, store them in a database, and actually provide in a URL some JSON data in terms of, for which prefix, for which question, how many responses were received for each type of response that was possible for that question. As I said, I was very groggy this morning. I apparently forgot my USB drive that has my secure shell keys, etc. So I sat down and wrote a basic demo for this in 2 hours. I hope it works. But it is really that simple. You just need a database handle. You can do the single-threaded because it's, I use Dancer, so it's going to be resident in memory. It's a simple processing thing, so long as you don't really crash the server. Everything should be fine. And you can also isolate these applications by, say, class, so that classes are not sharing one database, so that if something happens to one, it doesn't affect the other stuff. I thought this was really neat. And that's the basic idea. We use Dancer to wire things together. You could use Modulicious, whatever. These are going to basically enable you to get the basic functionality in 50, 60 lines. You will still need, things like account management, data export, or importing people's slides if necessary. There are all sorts of niceties you can put on. But the basic thing takes, 50, 60 lines. So the backend just processes SMS messages, logs everything in a nice little format, even though Twilio does that for us too. We just, want to be able to do comparisons between what we received and what was actually considered relevant. See if a student who has responses for, say, 90% of the questions also has some invalid responses or whatnot, or, be able to eyeball it by a human is important. Basically, embed a little, the questions can be embedded in standard HTML, kind of like deck.js style. That's my slides there. That's what my slides are in. So you can basically have a little database of questions, pull the questions in JSON, embed them, put them in a little JavaScript template in your HTML, serve that HTML. No more requests for questions need to happen. There can be little controls in there that start and stop polling, show how many people have responded, so on and so forth. That's the front end. And then you need management stuff, which is where it gets a little involved. So this is not just Perl. There's HTML and JavaScript involved, which is why my last couple of blog posts were about JavaScript templates. Ingi has something called Jamplet, which I really recommend. It's very nice. And then there's something called Pure.js, which I'm still trying to figure out. I can't quite understand the syntax, Part of it is the fact that when you have multiple lines of JavaScript with various callbacks specified in Vim, it gets really all over the place in terms of syntax highlighting. I just can't penetrate these directives written in strings. But we can use, we can then basically package these things as little cloud applications, you know, an Amazon image or for Staccato or whatever it is. Each class gets a set of phone numbers and set of finite number of user IDs, which are basically the instructor and his TAs and admin staff, etc. Makes it much more secure than, say, your general course management software with their... I remember showing somebody how students, in most course management software, students can send messages to professors. So I go to the message thing and I say, alert this, that, and the other thing. Professor receives the message and the alert pops up in the message box. I'm talking to their, you know, lead program. I say, this is a little bit of a security issue, don't you think? Like students being able to send me JavaScript that's executed in my browser, and there was no response. So you never know what's in the background, all these, with all these course management software that's out there. So if you don't want to be insecure, you have to be a little bit isolated from that stuff. On CPAN, there's TWIML, I guess that's how you describe it. That's the markup. Those are the tags that Twilio understands to send responses to people. One important thing with Twilio is if you buy one of the cheap numbers, sending SMS through those numbers is limited to 1 per second. No matter how many you pump into it, you can only send 1 per second. An alternative for 500 people, if you want to send it to 500 people, is to buy 50 numbers. So things can be done in 10 seconds if that works. An implication of all the alert systems that, you know, colleges have installed after things like Virginia Tech is that there's a lot of repeaters and capacity and cell phone access in all sorts of corners of campi that used not to exist before. So I haven't tested any of this, but this is sort of logically making sense to me. Of course, if you're really lucky and if you're making a boatload of money doing this, you could buy one of the short numbers for like $3,000 to $5,000 from Twilio, and that allows you to send a lot of text messages. Although I would probably, in a classroom, not confirm every message received by a student. At the end, I would just send them a summary of their interactions that day so they have a little record of it, because, you know, you're asking people 3 to 6 questions per class. You know, 500 phones dinging, beeping, whatever. And that's probably not a good thing. And then the Twilio API is the REST API that Twilio offers, where you can control calls. That is largely irrelevant for this. We're just going to receive text messages and send the occasional text message. So I did go through that. Okay, so if you want to give it a shot, we have a question consisting of 4 alternatives. The identifier, I don't know if this is going to work. I only tried it with Google Voice this morning, so you know, it may not work. But if you have an unlimited text plan, if it's not going to cost you anything, or if you're on Google Voice, the identifier YP1A, YP1B, YP1C should be the only thing in the message. And just text the one you like the most, Mo, Moo, Moose, or Moot. And we'll see if we get anything back. Let me see if it's actually running. Nah, it's not actually running. So give me a second. That was a little silly, but give me a second here. I'm going to unplug for a second. I was so nervous about the screen stuff that I forgot about actually logging on and starting the server on my Linode, by the way. Linode rocks for everybody. They're just wonderful. Okay. Okay, so I guess it was actually running. I had just turned off my iTerm. Anybody still sending a message?
With or without the brackets?
Without the brackets, please. Now, if anybody is watching, please don't mess too badly with it. No, this is the 50-line demo that I put together this morning. So, if you wanted to mess with it, you could. But well, we'll see. 3 people like C, 2 people like D. Four people like C, 2 people like D, 3 people like D. Yeah, so that's in JSON. I tried to wire this to a Google pie chart, but I was not having any luck, and I hadn't slept much. The whole air conditioning thing in this building just drives me nuts. But so A is moo, B is A is mo, B is moo, C is moose, and D is moot. And if we take a look, yeah, 5 people like moot, apparently, unless everything crashed while I wasn't looking. Nah. One F? It probably wouldn't be registered. Yeah, I think my pattern doesn't allow. Pardon me? Case matters. Wait, case shouldn't matter. I don't remember what my pattern is. Let me look at my pattern. Told you it's bad. AZ2, optional spaces, question number consisting of up to 7 digits. Alternatives are A through E, possibly. So you would still be able to send a non-existing alternative, because I wasn't sure if I was going to do 4 or 5 for this, but I couldn't think of anything. So the basic architecture, quote unquote, of the system is trivial. You just have to put a lot of niceties in there, but it is trivial. It's just a URL for you to process these SMS messages. There are only a few well-defined things that Twilio can send you. Basically, so long as you ensure that the account SID that you get with the message is the same as the account SID you expect, you should be okay. Of course, you should still check the stuff you receive, but you should be okay. If things are going badly, Twilio gives you, the raw logs for calls, messages. Everybody's phone numbers are being displayed now. I'm sorry. That was even recorded. I hope that doesn't cause anybody any trouble. I didn't mean to do that. So I'm not going to show any more of the details, but you get your logs, you get your error codes, you get your usual information, and the management stuff is something you have to do anyway. Like, people have to author the slides, people have to export the slides. For some of the person response systems, you actually have to export your slides to PNG, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, what I'm saying is, you do whatever you want with your slides. Give me a list of questions and their answers. Usually publishers actually have databases of these things, the kind of thing that goes into an instructor's guide or whatnot. You can actually save those. You do random, self-authored, etc. And actually utilize the cell phones that the students are playing with for a good purpose without having the requirement for them to actually download an app that might be tracking them. And if they never want to associate their names with the phone number. They don't have to, obviously. They would be losing a little credit for that. But at least in that process, you can guarantee them a little bit of privacy. But if you have any comments, feedback on the general idea and implementation, that would be nice, yes?
On the management end, a class of 500 people switch cell phone plans in the middle of the semester.
That's a good question. And I'm not sure. That's a good question. People who are on family plans, things might happen there. But that's one thing that I didn't actually think about. But an easy thing to do here is basically all the universities that I know of provide their students with a campus ID, net ID kind of thing, email ID, whatnot. So it's not too hard to tell people the moment you switch, you need to send a text message with your net ID. So we have a record of it.
You don't have the experience yet of how many of the students.
No, this is something I demoed for a few people who gave me some more ideas. I went back to the drawing board, etc. So I'm getting more ideas, basically. I realize that I'm going to be asked to help people evaluate things again. And I'm becoming increasingly dissatisfied with the increasingly non-transparent things people are offering. And there is potential for actually using these things very pedagogically, like simple auctions in the classroom, etc. And for the longest time, I begged the manufacturers of this, well, the predecessor of this gadget, can we have a little API where I can actually, in real time, get these things? Or can you actually allow me to, reverse engineer it so we can actually, even have a very primitive auction or a public goods thing? Do you want to contribute or do you not want to contribute, that kind of stuff? And they really thought they had great state secrets and, wouldn't share stuff. So trying to come up with a way of doing this. Yes, Gabor, sorry.
Have you tried to integrate it
With
with ACT?
ACT?
Yeah.
No.
So then Perl conferences, workshops all over the world could use this either for immediate feedback for the specific. So you can talk to Barbie maybe.
That would be good.
So you can get immediate feedback for the
That would be good.
presentation.
Because what Twilio provides, am I going over time? No. What Twilio provides is a way to buy phone numbers when you need them, and then release them as well. So, for the duration of the conference, whoever is organized, whichever city is organizing the conference, they could buy the phone numbers, associate them with an URL, and it would be. That would be a good way of both accounting for the expense of it, separating it from the specific programmer who worked on it, and also having this number only valid during certain periods where the conference is actually taking place, pre-post, that kind of stuff. That's a good idea. I never thought of that actually. Yes. Refresh. Yes.
I've seen the little remote things used in classes to either track attendance or to give on-the-spot quizzes.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that I've always seen with that is actually at Hackers on Planet Earth, a conference in New York, someone demonstrated how with those you can essentially send out whatever you wanted from them on any frequency and receive the answers that other people were doing in real time. So you could actually manipulate, well, I was thinking, you could essentially write something where you place this little device in the classroom and it receives all of the ones, once 75% are in, it sends out the majority answer. You wouldn't even have to attend the class, it would just send out what everybody else picks.
For the benefit of those people who are watching this at home, let me just summarize this real quickly. It doesn't surprise me, actually. What was your name? Simon just pointed out that you can actually program an alternative base station that just receives everything that is being sent. It's, I think, 1800 megahertz is what these guys use. No. 15, something like that, something that doesn't actually clash with the cell phones, and I can't remember exactly what it is. And just sees what the majority response to a given question is and then sends that. One way we deal with that is basically this doesn't form a majority of your grade. So there's technical solutions and there's social solutions. Technical solution to that is, of course, to require encryption on this device and pairing and identification and all of that good stuff. That would probably make these simple pieces of hardware very expensive. The first PRS system that I know of was actually implemented at the Cornell Physics Department, which used wires, kind of like an old TV studio, and there was none of this. But then you have to wire a specific room for it.
I was thinking about this and sort of whether the same problems are applicable. And I sort of thought of SMS spoofing.
You can spoof everything. You don't even have to spoof anything, really. If you're using this for attendance, and your friend comes, takes a picture, sends you the picture, and you text it. Basically, the system is not designed to be foolproof. We're not, or extremely secure, because we're not trying to guard secrets. We're basically trying to give people an incentive to actually come and try to think about these questions, because questions like these might appear on exams. So if it turns out that you showed up at every class and actually answered all these questions correctly, but you get to the exam and score 0 out of 100, that gives you some information. That's different than a banking transaction. So I wouldn't, rely on this for that kind of stuff. Where this might matter in terms of spoofing is for identifying people. And I guess you could use, when people text you their emails, the way I thought about this, and I would love for people to tell me that I'm doing things wrong, because I don't actually know what the right way is, if there is a right way. But basically, they're supposed to send you their net IDs so that you can associate their grades with the rest of the grades in the grade book. And the most annoying thing to me in my life is all these websites that are emailing me things saying I subscribed for stuff without actually confirming that the message came from I actually intended to subscribe. So similar to the confirmation stuff, send a message to the email address that was sent and ask them to confirm that that number matches their net ID. So long as their email has not been hacked, the person whose identity is trying to be spoofed would be aware of it at least. And if, the nice thing about this kind of course situation, especially since I would like everything to be self-contained for a given course, is the fact that if everything fails, there's nothing preventing a student from showing up with an ID and the actual physical phone and proving it. So there are multiple fail-safes. But yeah, you can, spoof SMS and pretend messages are coming from other people. You can also just send a picture of the question to your friend. And
I was actually thinking about more malicious use of it, which is sending the wrong answers from someone else. I guess it says something about me that that's the first thing that I thought of.
no, this is good. So
Two different answers. Does your software track that?
well,
Right now, it's like 4. I wrote it for 3 different ones.
but this is the 40-line demo or 50-line demo that I just wrote, which means, there's no actual checking for any of that stuff. And we do want everything recorded. Sometimes we take the last response as correct. Sometimes we actually take the correct response as correct. So if you've ever sent the correct response, depending on what incentives we want to provide. So, for example, I implemented online problem sets with random draws from large test banks. And, basically you can take them as many times as you want until you get them correctly. The catch is, as opposed to the majority of the systems out there, you can't actually get the answer from examining the source code. It's amazing how many times people take the test. You're drawing 20 random questions out of a bank of like 600 questions. You always get a couple more questions that you didn't see before. How many times people try these things before, when they're trying to reach 100% before they give up? So there are strong incentives, unfortunately, completely out of proportion with the credit they receive, to both cheat if it is feasible, but also to keep trying. But anyway, the important part there is how do you guard against sending incorrect answers, even if you have actually correctly associated the number. Somebody could pull, I don't know the answer to that. And I didn't think about that.
Your point about sort of the grade aspect of it, not making a large enough aspect of the grade to make it worth it, I think was what sort of, to me, made sense. Like, well, if it's only 10% of the grade, it doesn't matter that much. Also, sending a student a summary of their answers would be helpful. So they can
Yeah, so at the end of class, because you don't want a musical tone, but you send a summary so they can actually verify that that's what they did. People can have pins, that kind of stuff. Giving them a pin might be a solution to that kind of thing. But basically what you're saying is, if I want to hurt your grade or make the average go down so mine appears more attractive, and I try to do this massively, I am not sure what the solution to that. And I don't understand the fundamental, communication layer to know that if there is a solution to that. There probably isn't, unless the incentives are correct. Like, if you're discovered, you get expelled, and there's some chance of being discovered, that kind of thing. Yeah. So that's the only kind of thing there, as opposed to, say, if you're in some Eastern European country and you're stealing credit card numbers, there's really no penalty to it. So the incentive to do stuff for even a small game is pretty high, like even $10 is pretty high. In this case, with any kind of thing, if parking tickets were all $10,000, nobody would park overtime, right? You can prevent things by either checking or making the conditional penalty really high. If you could actually enforce, death penalties for parking illegally, nobody would be parking illegally. It's just not the kind of system you want. But if you're in a college context, I guess, and if somehow, some way, some fashion, this is discovered, but the vulnerability is there. I mean, somebody who's really malicious could actually, I don't know if you can actually collect numbers when SMS messages are sent in the same location as you are. Can you collect those numbers out of Clear? Are they plain text? Yeah. So if somebody could collect the numbers for everybody in the class. Yeah, I know. I forgot about that.
It's not too hard to keep their phone number.
Yeah.
You can spoof caller ID.
Truly, yes. Well, this is why it's good to have technical people actually think about this. Yes.
I have to be kind of telecom, so.
I'll pick your brain.
Question, though, is, like all the questions that are coming up, don't the commercial products already have a way to address most of the concerns, like changing your answer?
No. Some of them only record one answer, but you don't necessarily know exactly which answer. You are also, are not allowed to, sometimes you can look at the source code, but looking at the source code puts you under many different obligations. It's not necessarily configurable. I am not very familiar with the most recent stuff people are doing, but the lack of flexibility in terms of whether you accept the first answer, the last answer, the correct answer, etc. These are all concerns, and those are all things that I worried about in terms of making something better. I do remember having to process long lists of responses with bazillion duplicates, but I'm not going to mention manufacturers and stuff. Like, the same device ID appearing 50 times because somebody kept punching, the keys, because what happens with a lot of these is there's a light that goes green briefly if the response was registered. I think the base station echoes the device ID or something. I don't know exactly how it works. But if they don't see the green light, or sometimes it glows amber, whatnot, batteries are running low, people punch a whole bunch of times, and I do remember having to clean up lists of these responses before merging with the gradebook. So I'm not sure if everybody does. Some people might. As I said, come July, I'm going to be asked to evaluate a bunch of these things again, and that made me think maybe there should be the alternative. But the spoofing possibility is real, combined with being able to collect phone numbers either through directories or through the air. That's something I need to think about. Any other questions? Yes.
SMS doesn't contain any of the geolocation information, does it?
Twilio gives you a zip code on the basis of the number, but it doesn't give you.
So that's just the location of the store where they originally bought
Yes.
the first cell phone.
So, my area code is 607. That's Ithaca. I find it kind of funny that Madison's 608, but I'm the only one who's amused by these kinds of things. But yeah, so if I go to California and do that, I don't get it.
It's not like if you rolled out an app, you could actually do geolocation.
That is true. And then you could know if they were sending it from.
At least the right building.
Yes. Definitely.
I'm sure you can spoof that.
Maybe it's not as accurate as the GeoIP drivers.
Which you can tell they're on campus or not.
So yeah, GeoIP is a possible. You can tell if they're on campus or not. I don't necessarily want to spy on students, though, and I don't necessarily want the TAs to get the phone numbers of all the students, even though they could potentially get it from the directory. But it's just,
You were mentioning earlier that there was a demand for telling whether the people were physically in the room or not, and geolocation seemed like it might be applicable.
Well, there isn't necessarily a demand for telling. They do attendance, but we do know that people can actually do the attendance without being physically in the room with all existing things, even when you have a paper and pencil thing where they sign names. No attendance system prevents people from having other people sign them in one way, shape, or another. So, among the imperfect things, one thing you want is not to create too much of a hassle for the people who are actually following the rules. And that's why I'm worried about the SMS spoofing aspect, because that would cause too much of a hassle for people who are following the rules. Because this is not like the midterms or the final exam where majority of people's grades are determined. This is where if you do things the right way, it benefits you a little bit. If you think about the question, if you actually, when we say discuss the answers to the question with your neighbors and then come up with the right answer, if you do that kind of stuff, that actually helps you learn. So it's to your benefit to follow the rules in that circumstance. And we just don't want it to be too hard for people who are doing the things right to do it right, or too invasive. But the SMS spoofing can screw things for people who are just doing what they're expected to do, and that's why I worry about that. Okay, well, thank you very much for showing up.